Willkommen in einem anderen Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 43 of my figure gaming video series. In this video I'll be covering painting Russian vehicles, specifically what colours you should use to paint a Russian World War II vehicle and of course infantry. Quick caveat, this video is not going to tell you how to paint figures. There are much better videos available on the internet which provide much better guide than this could ever possibly provide. This video is primarily designed to assist players in purchasing the correct paints to use to get their new 6mm figures painted up. The paints I'll cover in this video are those which most players would use with a brush, dry brush basically, which includes Mr. Hobby, Tamiya and Vallejo. Paints designed for airbrushes need to be applied with an air gun and should not be applied with a paintbrush. As this video is designed for new gamers who have probably not invested in an air gun, I'll avoid paints which require an air gun. But if you do want to get an airbrush, then Iwata is an excellent brand. I prefer a compressor which has an air tank, but Iwata has some reasonably good electric compressors which do impress me. Now back to the colours or paints. The first point is there is no answer to the question of what is the historically correct colour to use. While we can create a pot of paint which is historically correct according to official records in most cases, however, we also have to deal with two wildcards. The first is lighting. When we view something, a lot of the light which has been reflected off the object has also reflected off background objects or even air. Light is rarely pure white light, which if reflected off an object will affect its colour accordingly. The classic example is pure white. We rarely see pure white even when the object is actually painted pure white. There's a simple test for this. Purchase a piece of coloured paper and cut out a 3cm square and a 9cm square. Then place the 3cm square 1 foot from a table edge and the 9cm square 3 feet from the table edge. If you look at the two pieces of paper from table height, align them up so they appear next to each other, you will notice that they are a different colour. Light colours look darker, dark colours look lighter, and this further depends on your location, indoors, outdoors, in a desert, in a forest, etc. It also depends how far you are from an object as our test previously showed. The second issue is the colours will be affected by weather conditions, in most cases fading to a lighter colour, but in some rare cases becoming darker, as occurred with World War II Russian green if stored in a dark location. So it's better if you don't even try to find or bother to go for the exact historically accurate colour. You'll go mad if you try. Now let's drill down to the paints that you will need to purchase before you start painting up your 6mm force mix, in this particular case Soviet World War II force mix. Let's start with the metallic paints. There is a wide range of metallic grains and some gamers will have their own preferences. However, I tend to focus on three types of grey. Light matte grey for tank tracks, light gloss grey for weapons or objects attached to a vehicle, dark matte grey for objects on a vehicle, or dark gloss grey for objects on vehicles. There are other metal-like colours you could consider. I typically only use rust, but sometimes do use oxide green or oxidized green. The other common colours cover glass, tyres and of course dirt. While not so fashionable these days, if you wish to colour glass a blue, then I select a nice gloss blue colour. Tyres and other rubber is never pure black, so selecting a rubber or tyre black is required. Finally, we have to deal with dirt, oil and grime, so I use an oil, soot and light grey as well. I've also included flesh for infantry in this case. You will need that if you're painting up infantry. The next set of common colours are the earth variety. We may need some nice earth colours to reflect dust, earth and mud. I normally select an earth colour which matches my bases. So in Russia in spring I would use Mr. Hobby mud, while in the dusty world of France in 1944 it's probably dark earth. My two most common colours have a star attached in this particular image. Now we need to select colours for wood, leather and canvas, as these may be found on a vehicle. There is a very wide range of wood-like colours. I typically stay with just two, marked with stars here. For leather and canvas, I use a single colour each, in the most part. However, you can try different colours and mix and match as you so desire. I have to admit owning all these paints, and I've used them all as well, but I've found for a specific army you do need to standardise on its core colour so you achieve a certain level of consistency. On the other hand, in real life is messy, so some gamers may decide to go for a variety of colours to reflect their troops and vehicles that have been in action for a while. Finally, you may also need some primary colours such as white, black, green, etc. Surprisingly, I found getting good, accurate colours for the Russians very difficult. Unlike the Germans, which had specifically named paints, this was lacking for the Russians, apart from the Vallejo range. For the Soviet summer uniform, I use Vallejo khaki, which is what I use currently and works quite well. If you're going to give the pants a different colour, then you may also need khaki grey. I'm uncertain about the helmet, but I suspect Mr. Hobby Olive Green is a good option. The winter uniform was a bigger issue. In the end, I just selected Vallejo Russian uniform and left it at that. To be accurate, the overcoat is a brown colour, and in that case I would probably use a dust brown colour. When we moved to tanks, when I started looking at the drawings that you could download from the internet or books, the colours provided confused me greatly. I normally use Vallejo reflective green for early war tanks, but the heavy tanks seem to use a darker green, and as a result I decided to use Mr. Hobby dark green. The Russians did have a three-tone colour scheme in the early war period, which I do like. The green is Vallejo reflective green with two types of brown. I use a flat earth and a khaki for these respectively. As I indicated earlier, the early heavy tanks seem to be darker. One other option apart from Tamiya dark green one is Vallejo Russian green 4BO. During the mid-period of the war, the darker Russian greens seemed to be used for the medium tanks as well, which I normally used Vallejo Russian green for. Another option is Tamiya JA green or Japanese Army green. One other option for the heavy tank is Mr. Hobby black grey, which I found in one paint guide. I feel it's a bit too dark, but does seem to work, and it was in a paint guide, so perhaps it's accurate. By the late war period, the tanks all seem to use a similar green colour. And again, in this case, I normally use Vallejo Russian green 4BO or Tamiya Japanese Army green. These two drawings of the IS-2 seem to imply both shades were used, or it could simply be the colour in the drawing is misleading me. I'm not familiar with the paints used in this particular paint guide, but the Russian, or the drawing of the Russian soldier, is good. This would be a summer uniform. The interesting point is the tank, which is a very light and flat green, which I have to admit I do like, or it looks good. I suspect this is a 15mm figure, not a 6mm figure. This shows winter and summer Russian soldiers, in this case using GHQ figures. I'm beginning to use GHQ figures a lot more these days, using painting jobs which are as detailed as possible. I do not have many GHQ figures, I only purchase normally a single pack of 50 infantry and 50 heavy weapons. The bulk of my foot is my trusty H&R figures, which, while not as detailed, are much easier to paint and are, more importantly, much cheaper. These GHQ tanks I really like, and I think I've mentioned in several other videos prior. I have no idea exactly what paints we use for this, but it looks very good, and for several years this has been my guide for Russian tanks, or at least what I've attempted to achieve. I never fully achieved this level of green or accuracy, but I think I got comparatively close. This shows a list of the paints which should allow anyone using a dry brush to paint any Russian 6mm vehicle or infantry figure. While it does not allow for more complex colour schemes, it's probably a good starting point. Quick note, 15mm figures need a lot more paints than this because of the additional detail that you require with them. And so this concludes episode 43 of my painting or figure gaming hobby series, in this case covering what paints to use to get your World War II Russian figures painted up. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.